Was sitting at my kitchen table in Charlotte, North Carolina, going through a stack of old tax returns my accountant had asked me to dig up, when my cell phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, gray and cold, the kind of day that makes 68-year-old knees ache. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but the area code was local, and something made me pick up. "Is this Frank Owens?" the voice on the other end said. A woman's voice. Calm, but with a specific kind of careful calm. The kind that comes from delivering bad news professionally. "Speaking," I said. "Mr. Owens, my name is Carol Simmons. I'm a paralegal with the office of Dale Whitfield. He's been your estate attorney for, I believe it says here, 26 years. "That's right," I said, already setting down the folder in my hand. Dale didn't call through his paralegal unless something was wrong. "Is Dale all right?" "He's fine. He asked me to reach you immediately. He's been trying your home line." There was a pause. "Mr. Owens, your son has filed a formal petition to have you placed under a legal guardianship." I sat very still. Outside the kitchen window, a cardinal landed on the feeder my wife Frances had put up 17 years ago, the one I still fill every Sunday morning. I watched it peck at the seed. "I'm sorry," I said. "Can you say that again?" She said it again. The cardinal flew away. I told her I'd be at Dale's office within the hour. I put the phone down on the kitchen table. I sat there for what was probably 3 minutes, but felt like something much longer, looking at the stack of tax returns I'd been so carefully organizing. Evidence I now understood that my only son was already building a case against me. Before I tell you what happened when I walked into that office, and what I found hidden inside my wife's old Bible 6 months after she passed, let me tell you who I am, because that matters here. My name is Frank Owens. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrical contractor in Mecklenburg County. I built my business from 2 pickup trucks and a 2-man crew into a company with 47 employees at its peak. I sold it 4 years ago for a fair price and retired with clean hands and a clean conscience. I have no mortgage. I have a brokerage account I manage myself. I read the Wall Street Journal every morning. My doctor, a man 15 years younger than me, told me at my last physical that my blood work looked like a man in his early 50s. I am not confused. I am not frail. I am not lonely enough to be foolish. Or so I believed. Dale Whitfield's office is in a low brick building off Providence Road. I've been going there since my late wife Frances and I first bought our home. Dale is 72, and he's the kind of lawyer who still keeps paper files on everything and remembers the names of your grandchildren. When I walked in, he was standing at the window with his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead, which is something he only does when he's agitated. "Frank," he said, and his voice had that weight in it. "Tell me everything," I said. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want pleasantries. I sat down and I put both hands flat on the edge of his desk the way I used to when I was reviewing a job estimate I suspected was wrong. He laid it out plainly. My son, my only child, had retained an attorney and filed for emergency guardianship in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The petition alleged that I was showing signs of significant cognitive decline, poor financial judgment, and an inability to manage my own affairs. It named specific incidents. It requested that the court appoint my son as my legal guardian, giving him authority over my finances and my medical decisions. "What incidents?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Dale slid a copy of the petition across the desk. I read it. According to the document, I had called my son 3 times in 1 week asking about the same home repair. I had allegedly bounced a check to my power company. I had missed a dental appointment and then denied making it. I had, the petition stated, become increasingly paranoid and withdrawn, pushing away family members who were only trying to help. Every single one of those things had an explanation. The home repair calls were because he kept telling me he'd look into a guy and never call back, and I was following up. The power company thing was a processing error that the company had already corrected in writing. The dental appointment I hadn't missed. I'd rescheduled it myself 2 weeks prior and had the text confirmation on my phone. And the paranoia. That one I set down the paper for a moment on. I looked at Dale. "He's building a file," I said. "He's building a file," Dale confirmed. And Frank, I need to tell you something else. He paused. He's already spoken to someone at your brokerage. He called in claiming to be doing preliminary research for a potential conservatorship. They flagged it and called me because you listed this office as a secondary contact 20 years ago. They haven't given him any information, but he was asking about the account balance, the recent transaction history, and whether you'd made any large withdrawals. I felt a cold, specific kind of anger settle into my chest. Not the hot kind. The cold kind. The kind I used to feel when a subcontractor tried to shortchange my workers and smiled while doing it. My son's name is Derek. He is 41 years old. His wife's name is Pam. They live in a house in Ballantyne, a nice part of Charlotte, in a house they cannot actually afford. I know this because I helped them buy it, $60,000 for the down payment 6 years ago, which I told myself was a gift and not a loan, and which Derek has never once mentioned repaying. I also know they are not financially stable because Derek has called me every 8 to 10 months for the past 4 years asking to borrow money for one thing or another. His wife's car, a medical bill, something he described once as a cash flow issue between jobs that lasted, as it turned out, 11 months. I've always helped. Frances used to look at me when I'd hang up the phone after one of those calls, and she would give me a look that wasn't quite disapproval. More like a woman who knows she's watching something happen that she can't stop but wishes she could. She never said anything unkind about Derek. She just got quiet in a particular way. What do I do? I asked Dale. He told me not to confront Derek. Not yet. He told me to let him believe I was unaware, that everything was proceeding as normal. He told me that the petition had just been filed and we had time before a hearing date was set. He said we needed to document everything, move carefully, and most importantly, get a clean, independent cognitive evaluation on the record before their hired expert could get to me. I drove home. I didn't call Derek. I sat in my kitchen in the house I've lived in for 22 years. And I looked at the cardinal feeder, and I thought about Frances, and I thought about the kind of things she would say if she were sitting across from me right now. She would have known. That was the thing. She always knew about Derek in the quiet way she knew things. She had been gone 14 months. I gave it 2 days. Then I called my son. Hey, Dad. His voice was easy, warm. The voice of a man who believed he had the upper hand. Hey, son, I said. I let myself sound a little tired. A little older than I am. It wasn't hard. I was exhausted. Listen, I've been having some trouble with the online banking again. I can't get the password reset to go through. You think you could come over Sunday and help me figure it out? There was the briefest pause. Then, warmly, Of course, Dad. Yeah, I'll be there. I hung up and sat for a moment. I had 1 week before Sunday. I used every hour of it. The first thing I did was call the security installer Dale had recommended, a retired police detective who now ran a private firm. He came on Wednesday, swept the house quietly, and installed 3 small cameras, one in the living room above the bookshelf, aimed at the couch and coffee table, one in my home office, facing the desk, one in the kitchen, mounted above the cabinet near the refrigerator, all feeding to an encrypted drive that mirrored to a secure cloud account only Dale and I had access to. I also called a doctor, not my regular physician, though I called him too. Dale had recommended a neuropsychologist at Atrium Health, a woman named, and I want to be precise here because her name matters, Dr. Beverly Holt, Chief of Neuropsychology. 40 years of practice. She agreed to see me on Friday, 48 hours before my son was scheduled to come over. The evaluation took almost 4 hours. Dr. Holt was a small, precise woman who had the manner of someone who has heard every kind of attempt to game a test and found all of them unimpressive. She didn't smile much, but she wasn't unkind. She tested my memory, my orientation, my abstract reasoning, my word recall, my processing speed. She asked me to draw a clock. I drew it, noted the ratio of the hands, labeled it clearly, and then, because I spent 31 years reading electrical diagrams, I added the circuit notation for a clock oscillator in the corner. She looked at it for a long time. "Are you trying to make a point?" she asked. I'm an electrician, I said. It's reflexive. She made a note. When it was over, she told me my score on the standard cognitive screening was a 30 out of 30. She said my processing speed was in the 92nd percentile for men my age. She said she would have a full written report notarized and delivered to Dale's office by end of day Monday. Sunday came. Derek arrived at 11 in the morning with Pam, which I hadn't expected. She had never come to my Sunday visits before. She was carrying a tray of store-bought cookies and wearing an expression of practiced concern that I recognized immediately. The look of a woman who has rehearsed her role and is performing it for an audience she hopes is paying attention. "Dad," Derek said, hugging me at the door. The hug lasted a beat too long. We sat in the living room. The camera above the bookshelf had a clear, unobstructed view of all three of us. I had tested the audio twice that morning. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I played the part not dramatically. I didn't pretend to forget who they were or stare blankly at walls. I played something subtler, a man who is slightly slower than he used to be, who pauses a little too long before answering, who seems to lose the thread of a sentence and then picks it back up in the wrong place. My son bought it immediately. I watched something in his posture relax. Pam brought up the bank after about 20 minutes, sliding into it the way people do when they've rehearsed a casual segue. "You know, Dad," Derek was saying, "it might just be easier to put him on the account, just so someone can help if there's ever an issue. The bank does it all the time for families." I let the silence sit for a moment. I looked at my son. "That might be a good idea," I said with the exact faint smile of a man who is relieved to have someone else take over. I never did understand all those websites. The flash of satisfaction on Derek's face was so fast and so unguarded that I had to look away. It was not the face of a son who loves his father. It was the face of a man who just watched a problem solve itself. Before they left, Derek put a piece of paper on the coffee table. He said it was just authorization to add him as a joint account holder, standard bank paperwork. He said it was nothing I needed to read in detail, just a quick signature at the bottom. I picked it up. I squinted at it, playing the part. "What does this top part say, son?" "My reading glasses are in the other room." "It's just the account authorization, Dad, standard language." I looked at the paper. I could read every word of it perfectly. It was not an account authorization form. It was a durable power of attorney, complete financial and medical control. I put it back on the table. I shook my head slightly, like a man who is deciding this is too much to process today. "You know what? Let me think on this one. My brain gets tired in the afternoons. Can I look at it this week?" Another flash across Derek's face contained frustration, quickly buried. "Of course, Dad. No rush." They left 20 minutes later. I waited until their car turned off my street. Then I walked to my office, opened the laptop, and pulled up the camera feeds. I rewound to the moment Derek slid the paper across the coffee table. I zoomed in. The title of the document was clearly visible, Durable Power of Attorney. I saved the clip. I named it Exhibit 1. The next morning, I called Dale and told him what had happened. "They're moving faster than I expected," he said. "There's a reason they need the money quickly," I said. "I don't know what it is yet. But people don't move this fast unless something is due." Dale said he'd have his investigator start pulling financial records. I told him to call me the moment he found anything. Then I went and made a fresh pot of coffee, and I thought about my wife. Frances had been organized in a way that I, a man who runs on instinct and 30 years of field experience, had always found slightly baffling. She kept files for everything: warranty cards, medical records, cards from birthdays going back to 1987. When she died, I had packed her personal things carefully into 4 boxes and stored them in the spare bedroom closet. I had not opened them. I wasn't ready. But something was pulling at me. Call it grief. Call it the particular intuition that comes from 30 years of marriage to a woman who always knew what was coming before it arrived. I opened the first box on a Tuesday night. It smelled like her, lavender and something older, paper and time. I went through it slowly. Christmas cards. A pressed flower from our anniversary trip to Asheville. Derek's report cards from elementary school, which I set aside and didn't look at. Her nursing certification from 1982. At the bottom of the box, beneath a folded quilt she had made for Derek when he was born, I found her Bible. I had seen that Bible every day of our marriage. She kept it on her nightstand. I had not seen it since she went into hospice. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. I opened it. A sealed envelope fell out from between the pages of Psalms. My name was written on the front, in her handwriting. Just Frank. No last name. The way she'd written notes to me our entire marriage. I sat down on the floor of the spare bedroom, and I held it for a long time before I opened it. The letter inside was 4 pages, written on her good notepaper, the cream-colored kind she bought in bulk from a stationery shop on Central Avenue. The date at the top was 11 months before she died, 3 weeks after her oncologist had sat us down and told us the cancer had spread to her liver and that we were no longer talking about remission. My darling Frank, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry for the silence between then and now. I know you. I know you've been keeping yourself busy, filling the bird feeder, managing the portfolio, finding reasons not to open these boxes. I knew you'd get here eventually. I'm glad you did. I want to start by telling you something I should have said out loud more often while I was sitting across from you at that kitchen table. You are the best man I have ever known. Not perfect. Lord knows not perfect, but good. Deeply, stubbornly, infuriatingly good. And that goodness is the thing I am most afraid of right now. Not the cancer, the goodness. Because you will use that goodness to excuse what Derek is going to do. I sat on the floor of that room and read my wife's words and felt the particular devastating experience of hearing someone speak the truth you weren't ready to hear while they were alive. She had seen it for years. She wrote it plainly. Derek had never learned to build anything because she included herself, generously and wrongly, I thought, had never made him. Every time he struggled, we smoothed the road. Every time he failed, we caught him before he hit the ground. And she had watched, over the last several years, as the asks became larger and more frequent, and the explanations became thinner. She had watched my face after each phone call, the way I always found a reason to say yes. And she had understood that I wasn't just helping my son, I was protecting the idea of my son, the boy who used to hand me tools in the driveway on Saturday mornings, the one I had coached in Little League. I was writing checks to preserve something that had already changed into something else. I have done something, Frank, and I need you not to be angry with me for how I did it. I turned the page. I went to see a lawyer in Raleigh, she wrote, someone Derek doesn't know and has no connection to. I told him everything. I told him what I was afraid of, and I told him I needed to build something that would outlast me. Something that would protect you even from your own instinct to protect him. She had set up a trust. Not a simple revocable trust, the kind estate lawyers set up routinely. An irrevocable trust. The Peterson family trust. She had started it 14 months before she died, funding it quietly from her own accounts. Accounts she'd held separately since before we married. Savings she'd accumulated over 30 years of nursing. More than I had realized. Substantially more. She had, over the course of the last year of her life, while I was driving her to treatment and managing the household and trying not to show her how scared I was, been systematically and legally transferring assets into that trust. The house had been redeeded. The brokerage account had been moved. The retirement funds she controlled had been repositioned. All of it inside a legal structure that I could live inside, freely, completely, with full access to all income, but that I did not own and therefore could not be pressured or tricked or legally compelled to hand over. The trustee was not me. It wasn't Dale, who Derek knew. It was my younger sister Vera, a retired school teacher in Raleigh who Derek had always dismissed as quiet and unremarkable, who had, as it turned out, a very sharp real estate attorney as a son-in-law, and who had been quietly managing the trust with Francis's guidance for more than a year before Francis died. You are protected, she wrote on the last page. I know that word sounds strange coming from me when it was always you who protected everyone else. But this once, let me protect you. The house is not yours to lose. The accounts are not yours to be stolen. You are safe inside what we built together, even if you didn't know we were building it. There's one more thing. I added a provision. Any beneficiary who contests this trust, or who takes legal action to remove you from the assets you are entitled to, is automatically and permanently removed from any inheritance. I did it quietly, and I did it legally. And I did it because I know our son Frank. I know what he's capable of when he's cornered and afraid, and I needed to make sure that the thing he was most afraid of losing was the thing he would lose the fastest if he tried to take yours. I love you. Fill the bird feeder. Drink your coffee hot. I folded the letter. I sat on the floor for a long time. I was not crying from grief. I was crying from something closer to reverence. My wife had spent the last year of her life in pain, exhausted, afraid, quietly building a fortress around me, and she had done it so gently that I had never once felt its walls. I had only ever felt safe. I called Dale the next morning. He had the trust documents within the hour, forwarded from Francis's lawyer in Raleigh. He read them twice before he called me back. "Frank," he said, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Something that sounded like awe. "She was good. She was the best," I said. 2 days later, Dale's investigator came back with something. I had been right that Derek needed money quickly. What the investigator found was worse than I'd imagined, and also, in a terrible way, clarifying. Derek had made a series of private investments over the past 2 years through a financial advisor in Fort Mill who had since had his license suspended by FinRay. The money was gone, all of it, somewhere close to $310,000, drawn from a second mortgage on their Ballantine home that Derek had taken out 18 months ago without telling Pam, and from an investment account he'd opened using money I had given him over the years for various emergencies. But that wasn't the reason for the urgency. The reason for the urgency was simpler and more humiliating. Derek had made a promise to Pam, a 10th anniversary trip to Europe, first class, private villa rental in Tuscany. The kind of trip a man promises when he is desperately trying to hold together a marriage that is quietly falling apart. He had put down a $25,000 non-refundable deposit on the villa 6 weeks ago. The balance was due in 16 days. He didn't have it. And the total cost of the trip, flights, hotels, the villa, the car rental, the reservations at restaurants he had no business booking, came to just over $48,000. He was trying to steal my independence for a vacation. I sat in my kitchen with that piece of information and felt something settle in me that had no clean name. It wasn't just anger. It was the specific grief of seeing your child as he actually is, stripped of every story you ever told yourself about who he was becoming. I called Dale. I said, "Let's go." The hearing was on a Thursday morning in November in a courtroom on the 5th floor of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. I wore a gray suit, the one I'd bought for Francis's memorial service. It seemed right to wear something she had seen me in. Derek and Pam arrived already seated at the petitioner's table when I walked in. Derek had a new haircut. He was wearing a dark blue suit I hadn't seen before, the kind of purchase a man makes when he needs to look like someone he isn't. He glanced at me when I sat down and then looked away quickly. He didn't look guilty. He looked impatient. Their attorney was a young man named Perry, who spoke fast and used a lot of language about concern and family welfare, and the heavy burden placed on a devoted son. He told the judge, a composed woman named Judge Patricia Walton, that I had been exhibiting a troubling pattern of confusion, that I had on multiple occasions called my son asking the same questions within hours of each other, that I had nearly signed over financial authority to a stranger when they had redirected me, and that I was clearly a vulnerable adult in need of protection. Then he called Derek's expert, a man named Dr. Alan Merritt, a forensic psychiatrist from Columbia, South Carolina, whose practice, as Dale's investigator had already documented, consisted almost entirely of paid testimony in guardianship and conservatorship cases. He had a pleasant face and a confident baritone and the sort of rehearsed empathy that reads well in front of a judge. He testified that I presented with significant short-term memory deficits, observable agitation, and a troubling perseverative fixation. He used that exact phrase, a perseverative fixation on precision and technical detail that he characterized as a coping mechanism for declining cognitive function. He was describing the way I drew the clock in Dr. Holt's office. Somehow, someone had gotten to that detail. I didn't know how, and I made a note to find out later. Dale stood up. Dr. Merritt, he said, his voice utterly calm. You testified that Mr. Owens exhibits a perseverative fixation. You're familiar with the term? Of course, Merritt said, with the confidence of a man who has never been seriously challenged. Are you an electrician? A pause. No. Have you ever read a wiring diagram? A technical schematic of any kind? I am a physician, not an engineer. Then you would have no professional basis, Dale said, to distinguish between a symptom of cognitive decline and the lifelong professional reflex of a man who spent 31 years reading and drawing technical diagrams every single day. Merritt's expression tightened. The context in which? Yes or no, doctor? Do you have professional training in electrical engineering or any related technical field? No. Thank you. No further questions. Judge Walton looked at Merritt for a long moment. Then she looked at Dale. Dale called Dr. Beverly Holt. She walked in like a woman who has been called as an expert witness 67 times and found the process mildly tedious. She sat down, stated her credentials without emphasis, 40 years, Atrium Health, the specific certifications, the specific publications, and then answered Dale's questions in the flat, precise language of someone who does not perform certainty because she does not need to. She administered a full clinical evaluation to Mr. Owen, she said, 2 days prior to the hearing. His score on the MMSE was 30 out of 30. His processing speed was in the 92nd percentile. His verbal recall was flawless. She had found no evidence of cognitive decline, no evidence of early dementia, no evidence of any deficits consistent with the petitioner's claims. Dr. Holt, Dale said, the petitioner's expert characterized my client's technical precision as a symptom of perseveration. In your clinical opinion, she looked directly at Perry, the petitioner's attorney, when she answered. In my clinical opinion, a man who applies the cognitive tools of his profession reflexively, accurately, and in context is demonstrating not impairment, but competence. What Dr. Merritt has called a symptom is, in my assessment, evidence of a sharp and well-preserved mind. She paused. I would also note that Dr. Merritt's declaration was, according to its filing date, submitted before he conducted any evaluation of Mr. Owens. That sequencing is, to put it professionally, concerning. A ripple went through the courtroom. Perry was on his feet with an objection. Judge Walton waved it down. Then Dale said he had one more piece of evidence. He asked the bailiff to set up the display monitor. Derek looked at the monitor. Then he looked at me for the first time since I'd sat down. His face changed. Just slightly. Just enough. The video was 1 minute and 40 seconds. It showed my living room, clean and clear, the afternoon light, coming through the windows. It showed Derek sitting across from me on the couch, and Pam beside him. It showed Derek placing a document on the coffee table and saying it was just account authorization. It showed me asking, in the mild, confused voice I had performed for them, what the top part said. It showed Derek saying standard language, nothing to worry about. It showed me squinting at the document. And then, in the last 20 seconds, Dale froze the frame and zoomed in on the title of the document that Derek had told me was bank paperwork. Durable power of attorney. Judge Walton looked at the frozen frame for a long time. Then she looked at Derek. It was not a look that contained sympathy. Perry tried to object. Judge Walton did not look at him. The petition for guardianship of Frank Owens, she said, her voice measured and final, is denied. Denied with prejudice. This matter is closed and may not be refiled. She set down her pen. Mr. She looked at her notes. Derek Owens. Derek Owens. I want to be very direct with you. You came into this court and asked me to remove your father's legal autonomy based on a pattern of alleged confusion that this video rather clearly indicates you manufactured. You presented a fraudulent document as something it was not, and asked a man you were claiming was incompetent to sign it. That is not the action of a concerned son. That is the action of someone engaged in elder financial abuse, which is a felony in this state. She looked at Perry. Counsel, I am referring this matter to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office. I am also forwarding a copy of Dr. Turney's office. I am also forwarding a copy of Dr. Merritt's declaration and the timeline of its filing to the North Carolina Medical Board. She stood. You are all dismissed." Derek sat very still for a moment after the gavel came down. Pam had both hands over her mouth. Perry was already gathering his papers with the efficient movements of a man distancing himself from a client. I didn't move immediately. I sat and let the room quiet down around me. Dale put his hand on my arm briefly, the way men of a certain generation communicate the things they don't say out loud. I found Derek in the hallway outside the courtroom. He was standing against the wall, his jacket open, tie slightly loosened, looking at the floor. Pam was around the corner on her phone. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and for one brief moment he looked like the boy he used to be, before something in his face closed again. "Dad," he started. "I'm not here to argue," I said. My voice was quiet. "I'm not here to yell at you or humiliate you." He waited. "I'm here because you need to understand something," I said. "Whatever you owe, whatever hole you've dug, this was never going to fill it. You know that, right? Even if it had worked. Even if you'd gotten everything you came for. It was never going to be enough." He didn't answer. "Your mother knew," I said. It was the hardest sentence I've ever spoken. She loved you the same way I did. But she knew. And she did what she did because she loved me more than she was afraid of hurting you." Derek looked away. A muscle in his jaw worked. "I don't know what comes next for you," I said. "That's yours to figure out. But I want you to know that I understand how you got here. I understand the fear and the shame and the corner you backed yourself into. I'm not glad this happened. Not any part of it." I put my hand briefly on his shoulder. He flinched slightly, then didn't move. Then I walked away down the hall toward the elevator, where Dale was waiting with his briefcase and his coat and the quiet satisfaction of a man who has done his job well. That was 8 months ago. I am sitting on my back porch this morning in Charlotte, in the same chair I've sat in for 22 years. The coffee is hot. The cardinal feeder is full. The morning is cool, and the light is that particular soft gold that only happens in late spring in the Piedmont. The kind of light Francis used to say made everything look like it was worth keeping. Dale called last week. He had updates. Dr. Merritt, the hired expert, had his medical license suspended pending review by the state board. 3 other cases had come forward once his testimony and mine became part of the public record. Dale suspected he would not be practicing again. Derek and Pam had filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy protection in December. The Ballantyne house is in foreclosure. They are renting somewhere in Concord now. I don't know the address, and I haven't asked. The DA's office declined to prosecute in the end, citing first-time offense and insufficient evidence of willful elder abuse versus civil fraud. Dale disagreed, but accepted it. I accepted it too, with more peace than I expected. Justice has more than one shape. My sister Vera came up from Raleigh last month to go over the quarterly statements for the trust. She is 63 years old, retired from 28 years of teaching 3rd grade, and she manages $4 million in assets with the same calm efficiency she once used to manage 28 80-year-olds. She sat at Francis's kitchen table, the one where so much of this had begun, and she walked me through everything Francis had built, every decision, every provision, every clause. Near the end of the meeting, Vera stopped on one page and looked up at me. "She added this the month before she died," Vera said. "After the assets were in and the trust was finalized, she called me herself and asked me to have the lawyer add one last instruction. The instruction directed that after my needs were fully provided for, 20% of all annual trust income was to be donated to the Levine Cancer Institute at Atrium Health in Charlotte. The same institute where Francis had received her treatment, the same doctors and nurses who had tried every option before the end. She hadn't just protected me. She had turned every dollar of our life together into an argument for someone else's survival." I folded the statement carefully and put it in my pocket. I'll file it in the cabinet in the spare room, in the box that now lives on the shelf next to hers. I refill the cardinal feeder on Sunday mornings. I drink my coffee hot. I lost my son, I think. The version of him I believed in anyway. The real one was a stranger I'd been meeting in small pieces for years and choosing not to see. But in losing him, I found the full story of my wife, the depth of it, the quiet ferocity of it, the kind of love that plans ahead because it knows it won't always be there to act, She told me in the letter not to be angry. I'm not. I'm grateful. I'm sitting in the house she protected, drinking coffee she told me to drink hot, watching birds come to a feeder she bought at a hardware store in 2007. And I am, in a way I didn't expect to be at 68, at peace. If you've ever had to draw a hard line to protect yourself from someone you loved, I think you know what I mean. Leave your story in the comments. I read everyone. I keep thinking about the cardinal feeder, not in a sentimental way, not the way grief makes you cling to objects. I think about it because Frances bought it at a hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special, $11, and she hung it herself with a hook she found in the garage. She didn't make a production of it. She just did it because she thought birds in the yard would be nice. That's who she was. She did quiet things that lasted. What Derek did was loud. The petition, the attorney, the fake concern, the document he slid across my coffee table with his thumb covering the title. All of it loud, rushed, aimed at something immediate. And what Frances did was the opposite. She sat in a chemotherapy chair and made phone calls to a lawyer in Raleigh and thought carefully about what would happen to me years after she was gone. One of them built something. The other tried to take it. I've spent a lot of time since the hearing thinking about where Derek went wrong, and I don't think the answer is simple. He didn't wake up one morning and decide to be the kind of man who files fraudulent paperwork against his father. He got there in steps, each one small enough to rationalize. We gave him the down payment, and he told himself he'd pay it back someday. He borrowed money for the car and told himself it was temporary. He made bad investments and told himself the next one would fix it. And then, at some point, the gap between who he believed he was and what he had actually done became so wide that the only way to close it was to stop being honest altogether. That's what dishonesty does when you let it run. It doesn't stay in one corner of your life. It spreads until the whole structure is rotten, and then when the weight comes down, there's nothing left to hold. I'm not absolved in this. Frances was right about that too. I made it easy for him to avoid the consequences of his own choices for 20 years, and I did it because facing the truth about Derek would have meant facing something uncomfortable about myself, that I had confused generosity with love, and that real love sometimes requires you to let someone feel the weight of what they've done. I didn't have the stomach for that when he was younger. By the time I did, it was too late to matter in the way it might have. What saved me was my own cleverness. I want to be clear about that. I installed cameras and I performed confusion and I prepared carefully, and all of that mattered. But the thing that actually protected me was built by a woman in a hospital gown who was running out of time and chose to spend what she had left thinking about mine. Frances had the character to see clearly when seeing clearly was painful. She had the intelligence to act on what she saw instead of pretending it away. And she had the will to do it quietly, without recognition, without even telling me, because the goal was never to be right. The goal was for me to be okay. That combination, the willingness to be honest, the clarity to know what to do about it, and the backbone to follow through even when it costs something. That's what integrity actually looks like when it's not just a word. It's not a speech. It's a phone call to a lawyer in Raleigh on a hard Tuesday afternoon. It's a letter folded inside a Bible. It's a feeder full of seed on a Sunday morning. I lost my son. I think I lost him a long time before I knew it, but I didn't lose Frances, not really. She's in the trust documents and in the Levine Cancer Institute donation, and in the way I still make my coffee hot, the way she told me to. Some things, if they're built right, hold.